Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Sirhan on X, live from Cincinnati, Ohio, here in the United States. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful 25th of February 2025. The spring weather is coming. Weather is getting warmer, especially here in my neck of the woods, where it ballooned to nearly 60 degrees today, and I was able to get a walk in. Tonight is basically a one topic show that talks about a major historical moment in all of history, all of sports, and you can probably argue all of sports culture, given the figure that it evolved. It was 61 years ago today in Miami, Florida, where the greatest upset in heavyweight championship boxing history at the time took place. This was Cassius Clay, later known as Muhammad Ali, stunning the most feared man to ever walk God's green earth at the time, Sonny Liston, by making him quit on the stool after the sixth round. A lot of theories into this. I'll divulge into it here in a second. But of course, interesting when we have the month of February, we've had the historic upsets. Of course, I talked about last night, two of them with Buster Douglas upsetting Mike Tyson in Tokyo, Japan, and the Miracle on Ice with the 1980 U.S. Olympic team in Lake Placid, New York, in the sport of hockey. But before that, we had Clay over Liston. I mean, this was basically no unforeseen coming. I mean, Cassius Clay was basically an 8-1 underdog. An 8-1 underdog back then is like being like the equivalent of a two touchdown plus a field goal underdog in a football game. Excuse me, or American football, because that's how one-sided this was projected to be. Nobody picked Cassius Clay to beat Sonny Liston, despite all of the antics of Clay. Excuse me, my apologies. Despite all the antics of Clay, with all of the taunting, all of the rhymes, showing up at Liston's house, showing up to the weigh-in with bear hunting because to prelude the nickname of Sonny Liston, Big Bear. And even through all of that, Ali basically said, I was going to win. Excuse me, not Ali, Cassius Clay. This is before he went to Muhammad Ali. And Sonny Liston was a guy that nobody wanted to fight because there were fighters and even their managers all the time who saw Sonny Liston just beat down people left and right. Basically saying, I'm going to fight. Basically saying, I'm not going to put my fighter in there with Sonny Liston because Liston is just a different animal. When he got that cold stare from Sonny Liston and the so-called rumored affiliations he had with the mob at the time, of course somebody wanted to fight him. I mean, this is before we had guys like George Foreman and Mike Tyson, who people called the most intimidating figures on the planet. Sonny Liston could argue Sonny Liston trumped both Foreman and Tyson when it came to that. I mean, the guy was just naturally scary. I mean, his style of the ring was just unreal. Come forward with fists of basically like punching bricks through a brick wall, especially a stiff, swift left jab that basically was so polarizing that basically stiffened you before he lowered the boom on you. Excuse me. That was Sonny Liston. I mean, he got the world heavyweight champ at the time, Floyd Patterson, did anything and everything he could to prevent this fight from happening or even try and prolong Sonny Liston because his manager at the time knew how vicious Sonny Liston was. Then when he finally got Floyd Patterson in the ring, fight was over in less than a round. I mean, Liston just floored him and beat the bricks off of him. 10 months later, there was a rematch. Excuse me, I apologize. There was a rematch 10 months later where the same thing happened. Sonny Liston knocked out Floyd Patterson in one round. Basically cleaned out his era. But like nobody left for him. And after the victory over Patterson the second time, Henry Cooper, who was a future opponent of Muhammad Ali, said, there's no way I'm getting in the ring with Sonny Liston. Actually, this was a quote from, I'm going to steal this here real quick to show you how scary of a figure Sonny Liston was back then. This was an individual named, you can pull this up here, I got his name, Johnny Taco, who worked with all three, Liston, Foreman, and Tyson, and said Foreman and Tyson collectively weren't even as scary as Sonny Liston. I mean, nobody wanted to fight Sonny Liston. Nobody did. Whenever the name Sonny Liston came up, fighters, whoever their trainers or managers said, we'll wait a minute because this guy's a problem. But enter the Louisville Lip Cassius Clay, later known as Muhammad Ali, 1960 Olympic gold medalist, worked his way to this point, and was basically voted as an opponent for Sonny Liston. Excuse me. This fight was basically supposed to be a gross mismatch. Ali basically came in with extreme confidence, basically doing what he likes to do. The brash young star who liked to talk, put together his little rhymes, his little poems, his little soliloquies, the taunts, showing up at Liston's house, showed up at a weigh-in, the weigh-in for the Ali Liston fight. Excuse me, the Clay-Liston fight. I keep thinking it's Muhammad Ali. That's the rematch. Showed up for the first Clay-Liston fight with a robe saying bear hunting, which is targeted Sonny Liston, who was nicknamed the Big Bear at the time. And understand to be so, because this guy was built out of stone. His muscles were supposedly above normal for a particular fighter, especially in the heavyweight division. And everything by the physique and everything going in, you would think Sonny Liston would have another opponent that he would just steamroll. Cassius Clay had other ideas. I mean, there was a photo, black and white, back in the 1960s, where Clay was training underwater in a swimming pool just to prepare for this fight. Let me remind you, this was not even thought of back in these days. I mean, your basic heavy bag, your speed bag, sparring, whatever. But Cassius Clay had extreme confidence to where he tried to sell this ideology that he was going to do it. Nobody wanted to believe him. So he was pegged as an 8-1 underdog. Basically the equivalent of like being a 20-point underdog in an NBA game or a college basketball game, or like a 3-touchdown underdog back in those days, because 8-1, it was a giant deal. I mean, Buster Douglas being favored 42-1 is one thing. It was just more like a number that was just gagged out of nowhere. This was an actual 8-1 odds in Sonny Liston's favor, because Liston was just cleaning house. I mean, during his time, he beat 8 out of 10 ranked opponents, knocking 7 of them out. Of course, 2 of them being the standout all-time great Floyd Patterson. And this was supposed to be another walk in the park. Cassius Clay had other ideas. We're going to fast forward to the fight a little bit because there's not much to talk about to the pre-hype, because it was basically Cassius Clay being Cassius Clay, spewing their rhymes, trying to get in Sonny Liston's head. And he showed up at Sonny Liston's house, apparently. Started out with Clay just doing anything and everything he wanted. What he usually does. The ring general zipped the speed in the left jab, controlling the fight. Basically from the first round and a half. Basically had the fight under control and having his way with this polarizing figure that is Sonny Liston. End of the second round, Liston starts to make his mark, using his jab to get inside. But as a case of anything he did, he couldn't do damage to Muhammad Ali or Cassius Clay, however you want to describe it. People remember him as Muhammad Ali, but back then he was Cassius Clay. I'll acknowledge, I still think of him as Muhammad Ali. From the third round on, the confidence started to build for Clay, and it started to disintegrate for Liston, because what happened was now Liston was starting to get a beating. His face was starting to swell. He had a nasty gash underneath his left eye, basically because of the left jab of Cassius Clay that was just peppering him all fight long the rest of the way. And from rounds 3 through 6, Liston just got a beating and a boxing lesson all wrapped into one. That's exactly what happened in Miami 61 years ago. Because the so-called baddest man on the planet, this big bear, this big tiger, whatever you want to call it, is getting tamed by the Louisville Lip, who basically talked his talk all through the pre-fight hype, all through the press conferences, even the weigh-in. And here he is backing every single word of what he said that he was going to do to the great Sonny Liston, the mighty tough Sonny Liston, who everybody feared. Everybody feared. Nobody wanted to fight. Cassius Clay's going to the lion's den and basically he's taming the lion, and that's what's happening here. And basically from this point on, Liston just had no answers, even no matter how hard he tried, for Cassius Clay. There's no other way to describe it, because Cassius Clay had his coming out party in this particular fight. And basically, the real shocker came at the end of the 6th round, when Liston refused to come out of the corner and quit on the stool to start the 7th round. Here's Sonny Liston, the baddest man on the planet at the time, the most scary individual walking God's green earth. I mean, all you could talk about all your scary people, your scary characters. None was more scarier at that time than Sonny Liston. And here he is, sitting down on that stool, quitting in the corner. Didn't want to come out, and the fight's over, and you're seeing Cassius Clay with this Clay shuffle. They're now coordinating, of course, Ali shuffle, the shuffling of the legs and the hands in the air, being hoisted in the air, being walked around the ring with his eyes open and a smile on his face as if he won the heavyweight championship of the world, because that's what happened. The crowning moment that took place, the shocker that nobody predicted would happen, took place. It was such a shocker that the crowd at 8,300 in that particular arena themselves were shocked. The media people were shocked. It was almost like a silence of shock that took place that day when Cassius Clay made Sonny Liston quit on the stool and became the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. At ringside is a standout Jersey Joe Walcott, who called the fight with Don Dumphy. Even he couldn't believe what he was seeing, because Jersey Joe Walcott's been in the ring with all of them. I mean, Ezra Charles, Rocky Marciano, Joe Louis, just to name a few. Even he said himself, nothing was quite like this, because no one could foresee this baddest man on the planet, this baddest man on the world, whatever you want to call it, the most scariest individual, the most imitating individual on the stool, the image of Sonny Liston sitting on the stool with his face beaten up, quitting on the stool at the end of the 7th round, and the fight's basically over. Clay's your heavyweight champion of the world. Still a polarizing image that nobody can answer as to why it happened. A polarizing situations why it happened, because there's all kinds of myths that happen. There's a rumor flying around that it was a shoulder issue, that Sonny Liston hurt his shoulder in training camp, and it basically hurt himself, supposedly, as the fight wore on, which I don't know how much claim it has, because we know how fighters are. When something like this happens, they make excuses. They don't want to accept the fact they lost to better guys. Another case in point here, because that's what happened. Because Sonny Liston just had it handed to him by the guy who eventually became the greatest. And of course, it spun off to a pop culture phenomenon that it was later Muhammad Ali. Of course, it started with the interview with this after the fight, where Cassius Clay was being interviewed, and he basically said, he wanted to go to heaven, so I took him in 7. I mean, that's how he summed it up. The king of the world, I'm pretty, I'm a bad man, I shook up the world, I shook up the world, I shook up the world. That was the post-fight interview, and that's basically how you sum up what Cassius Clay did to Sonny Liston 61 years ago today in Miami, Florida. No one could foresee this coming. Sonny Liston, the myth, the pariah, or whatever you want to call it, quitting on the stool. The supposedly baddest man on the planet, the so-called most intimidating figure of all time, just quitting on the stool, in an image that still shocks everybody 6 decades later, because that's probably the last thing on anybody's mind. Excuse me. Actually, going into this fight, only 2 people thought Muhammad Ali was going to win this fight, but just this image of Sonny Liston quitting on the stool is unreal. I know Liston had all kinds of demons, affiliations with the mob, etc., etc., etc. I will touch on here in a minute, as I touch on later on here in a second. But it doesn't deter the fact that what Cassius Clay did on this day just basically was just shocking. Now, let me remind you, this is before the term upset was coined all over the place. This is before Super Bowl III with Joe Namath's guarantee. This is before the 1980 Olympics with the U.S. hockey team. This is before Buster Douglas beating Mike Tyson. Before the Giants beating the 2007 New England Patriots, stopping them on their path to perfection. This was the shocker of all shockers at the time. Nothing compared to this. Nothing. And for Cassius Clay to come out, say the things he said before the fight, did the things he did before the fight and the build-up, at the weigh-in, and to back up his word, basically round for round, minute for minute, punch for punch, to make Sonny Liston quit on the stool the way he did, shows you why he eventually became the greatest. I mean, no one could foresee this coming. I mean, even Mike Tyson said nobody was as intimidating of an individual in the ring all time than Sonny Liston. That's to tell you the accolades that Sonny Liston gets. And basically, that was all she wrote. End of that round, Cassius Clay wins the heavyweight championship of the world. Of course, it prompted the rematch 1 year later, May 25th, 1965 in Lewiston, Maine. We know the story of that one, the so-called Phantom Punch, where everybody wonders whether that punch landed or not. Ali, of course, turned the fist, yelling at Sonny Liston to get up because the punch apparently didn't hit him. Liston got up, Ali poured it on, fight's over. Which, of course, raises more questions than answers in regards to the career of Sonny Liston, because nobody knows what happened in those two fights. Here he was steamrolling everybody, steamrolling top contenders. Of course, whacking Floyd Patterson out twice, both times in the first round. And here he is, just in the one fight quitting on the stool. Second fight just going down out of a punch that still many people wonder if it actually landed. And now we have a whole new set of questions, a whole new set of conspiracy theories that take place with the standout Sonny Liston. You know, was this had to do with affiliation with the mob, his so-called rumored abuse with drugs, whatever. Nah, name it, have at it. But the Sonny Liston never got to that top level ever again, because he got the first fight, just got the beating of his life and a boxing lesson to boot. We know about the story with Cassius Clay, later became Muhammad Ali. You know, lost the belt because of reasons. Again, I'm not using my platform to talk about it. Got the title back in 74 when he shocked George Foreman. A little more than 10 and a half years to the day he beat Sonny Liston. He beat George Foreman. Got the trilogy with Joe Frazier. Of course, the trilogy with Ken Norton, Ernie Shavers, Jimmy Young, George Chuvalo. List goes on and on about to the fighters he beat. Ernie Shavers, of course, lost to Leon Spinks in 78. Got it back in his last world title as a 3-time lineal heavyweight champion of the world. That, of course, the career of Cassius Clay / Muhammad Ali. Maybe you could argue because of how Ali was, how brash he was, how he carried himself, all the trash talking and everything, that what he did to Sonny Liston was probably set the stage for what sports in America eventually became. Because I've always said one of the premier pop culture icons, from the sports field to pop culture in general, was probably none other than Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay himself, because that's what it was. And what he did to Sonny Liston basically set it off, and basically sports in America became totally different at that point. Started seeing making mainstreams on the television networks. You know, basically at that time it was network TV with ABC, NBC, and CBS. Later, boxing and sports became to all of the premium networks, pay networks, and to what we see now with live streaming, podcasting, etc., etc. Some people would point to this night, February 25th, 1964, as the starting point, because that's what Muhammad Ali was. Of course, he had that documentary several years back on ESPN, the Ali Rap, where you could probably say, I think it was some rapper, I can't think who it was. I think it was the guy from Public Enemy. I can't think of what his name is at the moment. But he basically said, you know, Ali, you could say Ali invented rap with his rhymes, his lyrics, the way he spoke, which has a point to it. But some people point to this, what he did to Sonny Liston, as the starting point. I mean, it's probably a coming up party like none other, because we talk about coming up parties the night you make the splash. What better way to make a splash than as an 8-1 underdog, winning the heavyweight championship of the world at a time when winning the heavyweight championship in boxing was the premier prize in all of sports. I mean, Super Bowls, NBA titles. Maybe the only thing close to it was winning gold medal for the Olympics, but that's a different dynamic. But at that time, the premier prize in all of sports was winning the heavyweight championship of the world. And that's what happened with Cassius Clay, 61 years ago today in Miami, Florida, when he stood Sonny Liston in front of 8,300. I think they polled basically everybody. I can't remember the number. I think only one or two picked Clay, but it was basically out of reluctance, because I guess Cassius Clay, you know, does a heck of a job selling fights with the way he talks, the way he sells and manipulates. But that was how Cassius Clay was. And the two guys that picked him probably did it more out of spite than anything else, because they were sold into the guy. But at the end of the day, those two wound up being right, because that's what happened. Now, of course, Sonny Liston basically was it. The career hit the downturn after the two fights with Ali. Of course, a whole bunch of wild shebangs in the conspiracy theories as to what happened with his career and his life afterward. There's actually a Showtime documentary called The Pariah of Sonny Liston. You can watch it. I highly recommend it because before we had a tantalizing figure like Mike Tyson, there was Sonny Liston. Sonny Liston was basically, if you say Mike Tyson, before Mike Tyson, even Mike Tyson himself will tell you this, because that's who Sonny Liston was at the end of the day. Of course, there's the message of why he died, overdose, affiliations with the mob, et cetera, because of 2 losses to, Cassius Clay / Muhammad Ali, rubbed the bookies off the wrong way. And you guys know back then, especially for my fight followers, there was a time that crime mobs were the ones that running the scene in the sport of boxing, and that's what happened. So that's what happened 61 years ago today. A shocker of all shockers at the time. Because 8-1 underdog was a big deal. I mean, the closest thing to it before that was James J. Braddock beating Max Baer in 1935 to win the heavyweight title. But that was a whole different dilemma, a whole different dynamic. This one was basically something unforeseen because one guy, Sonny Liston, was cleaning house and basically doing it effortlessly. But here comes Cassius Clay, and he beats Sonny Liston effortlessly, gives him a boxing lesson first, and then a beating in the first fight. And basically where Sonny Liston, this intimidating, this imposing figure, who was one that got fighters to never think about fighting him. He's quitting on the stool at the end of the 7th round. And basically, as Cassius Clay eloquently said, he wanted to go to heaven, so I took him in 7. Because Ali openly predicted an 8th round knockout to him in front of everybody. Excuse me, but Sonny Liston didn't come out for the 8th round. We didn't even make it to that point. All kinds of myths, all kinds of questions that still have really questions that are never going to be answered because some of the key pieces here are no longer with us. But it still makes you wonder why it happened, what happened that night. I could come up with an easy answer. Cassius Clay dared to be great. He basically took on the baddest man on the planet and basically out-batted him as the baddest man on the planet that night. It wasn't even debatable. That's why he's called the great Cassius Clay. Now, of course, Muhammad Ali. And of course, the second fight, I'll probably touch on in a few months when I touch on that anniversary. Whole new shebang. We know what this was all about. The phantom punch or the punch that landed or whatever. Still raises questions to this day. Did it land? Did it not land? What was Liston thinking about this? There's no way Ali should just dispose of Liston in 1 round of the rematch, but he did. And that's how it happened. Questions still linger to this 2-fight series in regards to the 2 fighters, but probably more so Sonny Liston, who was just steamrolling the heavyweight division. Knocked out, I think, was it like 8 out of 10 he fought 8 out of 10 fighters who were ranked in the top 10 at the time. 7 of them he knocked out. Of course, 2 times he knocked out Floyd Patterson in 1 round when Patterson was first the heavyweight champion of the world. And then was obligated to a rematch. And Floyd Patterson, you can argue, is a top 20 all-time great heavyweight. But that's who Sonny Liston was before Cassius Clay / Muhammad Ali happened. I can go on and on about all these details and on. But it's events like this, before my time, I like to talk about for one simple reason, because too many people in all these sports communities and every walk of life is now too deep into the recency bias when it comes to this sort of thing. I have to put things in perspective a little bit. Every time I think of February 25th, I don't think about the mismatch between Mike Tyson and Frank Bruno, which was a fight that had no business taking place. I don't think about the dirty tactics of Nigel Benn against Gerald McClellan, which was basically a bunch of cheap shots because you couldn't beat Gerald McClellan without the cheap shots. The only thing I could think about was Sonny Liston sitting on that stool, quitting on the stool against Cassius Clay at a time when Sonny Liston was steamrolling everyone, and then he resorted to this when he fought Cassius Clay. Think of the image for my fight followers. Think of the image you saw Oscar De La Hoya quitting on the stool against Manny Pacquiao when they fought. That's the exact image Sonny Liston had when he quit against Cassius Clay in 1964 in Miami. Exactly the same. It's actually on there. You can Google it. You can Wikipedia it. It's on there. It's exactly the same. Very, very polarizing in its own way. Very, very surreal in its own way. When a fighter from the 60s to the fighter of the 2000s quitting the exact same way. I mean, both got boxing lessons, both got beatings, and to wind up quitting on the stool the way they did. Something that's I never thought I would live to see it or even talk about. Actually, people that lived to see that fight in the 60s or watch it in person will tell you the exact same thing. No one saw this coming from Sonny Liston. Actually, best fight one you can hear it from is from the legendary HBO commentator Jim Lampley, who was on a podcast with Al Bernstein not too long ago. And he said the first fight he ever saw in person was Cassius Clay beating Sonny Liston at a time when nobody thought they was going to do it. It's still amazing to me because we see fighters get upset all the time. We see sports upsets all the time. But something like this, maybe in its context, just how it was done. Now, not forget the odds for a second. Forget the 8-1 odds because there are bigger sport upsets with bigger odds. The thought of Sonny Liston quitting on the stool, the way he did, despite all of the excuses and everything. The excuse that Sonny Liston had, it even used to that day for why he quit, is something that was just way unforeseen. Forget about the ideology of Buster Douglas beating Mike Tyson. I mean, the circumstances, you had a feeling that was going to happen. Forget the odds on that one. Excuse me. But for this fight to end the way it did as a result, and to still have questions about it, speaks to how polarizing this upset was, because at the time, this caused sparks everywhere in the sport. Forget about the hot dispute between Marvin Hagler and Ray Leonard. Forget about the hot dispute between Pernell Whitaker and Julio Cesar Chavez. Forget about the baloney stoppages or baloney judging we've had over the years. The fact we're asking more questions about Sonny Liston quitting on the stool than anything else at the time says all you need to know. No one saw this coming. And the way Cassius Clay did it, the way he did it, just first he gave him the boxing lessons with this left jab in the ring. And then just basically put the combinations together and deliver a beating to his face is something unreal and unforeseen. Nobody could ever foreseen this coming. But it was this night 61 years ago, Cassius Clay introduced himself as the greatest. Said he was. He said he was going to beat Sonny Liston. He did it. Backed it up. He eloquently said Sonny Liston wanted to go to heaven, so he took him in 7. He was the king of the world. He was pretty. He was a bad man. And on that night, February 25th, 1964, as he said 3 times, he shook up the world and went on to probably the greatest career in boxing history, an iconic figure, a pop culture icon, whatever you want to name it. I mean, to show you how much of a pop culture icon he was, he basically tore down Atlanta in the 1996 Olympics when he lit the torch, and he almost tore down United Center in 1997 in Game 1 of the night NBA Finals between Utah and Chicago. The same house Michael Jordan was in, and the crowd just went bonkers when Ali was introduced. That tells you what type of a pop culture icon Muhammad Ali was. And it started this day 61 years ago in Miami, Florida, when he shocked Sonny Liston. Well, I could talk about more historical events if I really want to, because I more enjoy talking about this than some of the stuff today, because stuff today, we don't have a grasp on it. The things you miss, but the things you see before your time, sometimes you wish you could go in a time capsule and live it, because historical events like this, we don't get to witness much these days for a boatload of reasons I can get into, but I'm not. Because this is one of those ones I would have loved to have lived. I mean, I lived through Douglas over Tyson. I lived through the shocker of the 2007 with the Patriots, the Patriots losing to the Giants on their quest to perfection. I lived through when Frankie Randall shocked Julio Cesar Chavez in 1994. I mean, not quite the upset level, but it was a bit of a shocker among many others. But I would love to have lived through this just to see how everyone reacted when Sonny Liston quit on the stool, because everybody's still asking questions about it 6 decades later. Think about it. Fights done in 1964. We're in 2025, and there's still people asking questions about what happened. I can tell you what happened. Cassius Clay first gave Sonny Liston a boxing lesson, beat him to a drum to where Sonny Liston just quit on the stool. Spare me the excuses of Sonny Liston. He just quit because Ali was just giving him the beating of his life. Plain and simple. And that'll include this one episode edition of Sir Hunt on X. I will be back tomorrow night. Actually, here a little bit for my X followers. I will be talking about the NFL offseason and some interesting things. But this show was devoted to the great Cassius Clay and his great performance. But I will be back tomorrow. Hope everyone have themselves a wonderful rest of the day, the 25th of February, 2025. And as always, make self-care your number one priority in life. Don't take care of yourself first. Nothing else matters. But until then, good night, take care, and God bless.